So today we're talking about the Men in Black, and not like the movies that came out in the 90s is kind of like a good way to establish a loose idea of what the Men in Black are. So they're not like the comical Will Smith, like goofy type. They are a crucial part of the UFO, UAP lore since according to the research, since the 40s. And the idea of the Men in Black first surfaced in 1947, around the same time that Roswell, which is the same year that Roswell happened. And if you don't know what that is, it's like one of the most notorious UFO cover-ups in history, basically. And I'm going to eventually do a video on that, just there's a lot of information, and it takes a lot. This video is going to be about different accounts, but it's going to also tie into a lot of different UFO lore and little side stories to make sense of certain things. So this is going to be kind of a long episode, I think, so bear with me. The idea is that you have this UFO alien encounter, and then you have too much information, or you have like a relic from it or something, a piece of debris or what have you, photos, and then these men will show up to your house and try to silence you. And there's a lot of stories, and there's some consistent features throughout each story, and we're going to get into those. So they're always wearing black suits, driving black cars, which are often vintage models. They speak in strange, almost robotic English, very choppy, very monotoned. They often appear out of nowhere and then just disappear. And then a lot of the accounts tend to have no hair or extremely pale skin, like no eyebrows, eyelashes, bald, super almost translucent skin, and almost mannequin-like. And they are often very unnerving and unsettling, and they don't ever do anything per se in the sense of like harming people. They just they threaten you, and then that is supposed to be enough to quote unquote silence you. And with like the whole unnerving thing, it's like if somebody in a suit that just randomly showed up to my house and was like talking like a robot and had no hair, I'd be a little concerned as well. Like I feel like it's not a bad, like duh. So we have 5 cases, and some of them have a little more details than others, and there's some really cool accounts and very interesting accounts. And the most famous one will be at the end, so bear with me. And the reason I say that is because it involves like celebrities and like people in the public eye, so stay tuned for that. The first case we'll be discussing is the Marie Island incident in 1947, same year Roswell became a thing. So this involves a man by the name of Harold Dahl, and on June 21st, his account, he states that he was on a conservation mission getting logs with his son Charles near the east shore of the Marie Island. That's up in like Washington and all that. And he claimed that he saw 6 donut-shaped objects hovering roughly about half a mile above his boat and start dropping molten metal debris. And then he also goes on to claim that this debris fell and killed his dog and injured his son. According to Harold, he was able to take photos of these crafts and present them to his supervisor, Fred Crimson, who also claims to have seen these donut-shaped UFOs. The next morning, allegedly, Harold at his house was approached by a man wearing a suit, acting strange, and described this encounter with UFOs in super unsettling detail, almost as if like super specific detail. And I quote, said,
"What I have said is proof to you that I know a great deal more about this experience of yours than you will want to believe."
Proceeding then to threaten him to be silent about it and never talked to anybody about it, which then he does for some time. Fast forward 3 days, on June 24th, Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot, reported that he saw a string of 9 shiny UFOs flying past Mount Rainier at the speeds that he estimated at a minimum of 1,200 miles an hour. And Mount Rainier is in the Pacific Northwest region, which is somewhat close to where the Herald's account took place. 10 days after Kenneth's experience, so 4th of July 1947, Captain E.J. Smith and his co-pilot and a stewardess reported witnessing unidentified objects in the Pacific Northwest as well. So we have, within 13 days, 2 weeks, we have multiple accounts, multiple different people, and multiple pilots saying that they have these experiences and have seen similar UFOs in the same area. And it would be one thing if it was just some hillbilly, in the woods guy, but these are pilots, these are trained professionals, these are people who, you're trusting people with their lives, so you would assume that they know what they're talking about. Kenneth Arnold then contacts Lieutenant Frank Brown of Military Intelligence 4th Air Force to discuss and analyze these ongoing occurrences. Brown and Captain William L. Davis, another pilot, flew from California to Tacoma and showed up at the hotel that Kenneth was staying at, and then proceeded to conduct interviews and collect samples and really just dive into the research of all these specific accounts, all happening in the relative same time frame. After this, Brown and Davis, both the military guy and the pilot, get on a plane to fly back, and they are killed both in the same plane crash. And I don't know, I'm not one to super jump to conclusions or whatever, but it's a little sus that they're looking into these UFOs and that there's these accounts of these people trying to silence somebody, and let's say they're all connected, it's all the same aliens, all the same UFOs. I feel like there is some kind of weird, this guy was told not to talk about anything, and he didn't talk about it, and everything was fine. And then these dudes start talking about it, and then they die in a plane accident when they're talking about UFOs. I feel like aliens and or the government have done more for less. Does that make sense? After the plane crash, the FBI started its own investigation, and when interviewing Harold Dahl, the dude who originally saw the UFOs, he said, in quote, "If questioned by the authorities, he was going to say it was a hoax because he didn't want any further trouble over the matter." It just kind of leads more into the, he was silenced, he was scared enough to lie to the FBI, and he wasn't going to talk to anyone, and then tie that in with the people who were talking about it and getting involved in it. 2 out of the 3 were killed, especially the fact that one of them was in the military and one of them is a highly respected pilot who knows what kind of connections he had. Kind of spook. Albert K. Bender's silence in 1953. I'm going to warn you right now that this case, in my opinion, is one of the weirder ones that kind of when people think of UFO people who study aliens and are into UFOs, in my opinion, this kind of touches into the we're not taking this one too seriously. But it is an interesting story, so that's why I kept it in here. Bender served in the U.S. Air Force in World War II, and he was super obsessed with the research of UFOs and aliens, extraterrestrials, and that was his bread and butter. That was his main thing. So much so that in 1953 he started the IFSB, which is the International Flying Saucer Bureau, and he also claimed to have a supernatural UFO experience in that same year. And I don't know if that's what prompted him to start this organization. I'm not 100% sure, But if anything it was gonna, I feel like this was it. In 1953, he also started Space Review, which I think you can still find some copies of, but I don't quote me on that. It was a magazine about UFO news, and he published a lot of different, just random stories and information about potential sightings and all sorts of things like that. In the summer of 1953, Bender made a series of discoveries which led him to believe that he finally figured out why the infamous they were hiding and covering up UFOs, and he was going to release this in the next following publication of his magazine. However, this didn't happen. He had all the manuscripts, he had everything laid out and ready to publish. However, he was stopped when he was visited by 3 men dressed in black, who already had read, somehow, the unpublished reports of these quote-unquote findings that Bender had, and had confirmed that his sightings were in fact, or his discoveries were real. Later on goes to call them the silencers because they threatened him and scared him into not publishing these findings in the paper, with quoting,
"We advise those engaged in social work to please be very cautious."
Then, after this discussion and meeting with these 3 men in black, he then canceled the IFSB, and the Space Review magazine stopped publishing. So just kind of like a recap, he has this experience, he starts all these organizations, and then once they start to get traction, he's visited by these so-called men in black, and they warn him not to publish it and kind of scare him out of it, and then he shuts down all production on his research and all of his publications. Now, after this, now this sounds awesome. This sounds like straight up like a movie, but moving forward, this is gonna get kind of weird in the sense of like Wooby making it up kind of garbage. He described the men as wearing all black with a glowing fog, and that their eyes glowed. I don't know. And that they communicated telepathically. He would go on to marry Betty Rose in October of 1954, so the next year after this experience, who then also believed that she started having encounters and experiences with UFOs and other extraterrestrial, supernatural type things. Bender would report that he had a second supernatural encounter. He was visited by 3 shadowy figures, and they did not touch the floor, but they hovered, and they told him that their human appearance was an illusion, and that whatever information he told to people about their visitation would not be believed. Which, like, yes, like if someone told me, like, hey, I was visited by these levitating, glowing people who were wearing skin, I wouldn't believe it either. And it's hard to, this kind of gets into that weird, like, is it real? And they actually told him, like, this actually happened, and it was so absurd that, like, they knew that it wasn't gonna be believed by anyone? Or is it just kind of made up and he said, like, this was so insane that they knew nobody would believe it, so that it's kind of like covering his tracks? I don't know. They then supposedly said that they abduct people and use their bodies as disguises when they want to travel on Earth, so they don't draw attention to themselves. Which does kind of tie into some later theories about what the Men in Black are, but stay tuned for that. So, after these events, strange occurrences started to plague him consistently. He had strange phone calls, bad health. He claimed that he would get telepathic messages. He also claimed that he was being watched and he felt as if he was being spied on. And then in November of 1952, he went to a movie, and on his way home, he noticed that there was a man watching him who had glowing eyes, and then proceeded to follow him home. He also then goes on to claim a bunch of stuff about, like I said, telepathy, hypnosis, levitating, all sorts of like really out there things. And this kind of just, in my opinion, kind of leads either 2 ways. Either he was really onto some crazy next level alien type shit, or he just was losing it and had like schizophrenia or something. I don't know. It's a fine line. Next case number 3, Robert Richardson and the missing medal from 1967. So this is kind of a longer one, just because it kind of involves like a notable institution. So let's just dive right in. On July 13th, 1967, Robert Richardson and his friend Jerry Coye, or I don't know how to, here you go. Were driving home, they were driving toward White House, Ohio. Shout out the Midwest, woo. And as they neared the halfway point, they rounded a bend and suddenly were confronted with an intense blue-white light that completely blocked the road. Supposedly, they had to swerve out of the way, and they hit this object that was in the road. Not by like a ton, but they kind of like fender bender hit the flying orby thing in the middle of the road. And then it disappeared. After this event, Richard was visited by a Men in Black type encounter situation, and noted that the car that these Men in Black drove was a 1953 Cadillac sedan with the license plate 8577D. Curious, he then contacted the police to try to figure out who owned this car with this license plate, and it turned out that that license plate had never been issued to anyone. About a week after this initial visit, he was visited again by 2 people. He was home alone, and the men were dressed in black suits and had very dark complexions. They gave off a foreign impression. One spoke with a noticeable accent, while the other was fluent in English. So, another major point is that Richard was able to find metallic debris at the site of this quote-unquote accident and kept a hold of it. And the discussions had with these Men in Black seemed to kind of contradict themselves in the sense that like they were trying to convince him that he didn't believe that this never happened, but also were trying to get pieces of this debris back from Richard. And when asked about it, Richard had said that he had already sent off these scraps or this debris for testing, and he didn't have any, or they were at least no longer with him. When this was said, the 2 men were visibly upset and left him with this quote:
"If you want your wife to stay as pretty as she is, then you better get the medal back."
The interesting part is that this medal that was collected was only discussed between a very small amount of people. Richard, the police officer that they called when they hit the thing, his wife, and then the person studying it. And every other time it was talked about in person, except for when he called on the phone to talk to someone to study it. And this leads to a lot of people believing that that phone call was tapped, and that's how these people, the Men in Black, were able to know about this so-called debris and wanted it back. Because if nobody else had talked about it, or he hadn't talked to anybody else, how would they have known and been there so quickly? The metal fragments that were found on the road were examined by Dr. Alan Utek. Utek? I don't know. He was a chemist. He was a chemist. He was a chemistry consult. He was a chemistry consultant from Wisconsin State University. He identified the material as primarily composed of iron and chromium with traces of nickel and magnesium. Further testing on March 13th, 1968, requested by Dr. Roy Craig of the University of Colorado's UFO project, revealed the following composition: that it was 75% iron, 20% chromium, 3% magnesium, 1% silicon, and 1% nickel. So it was some kind of like mixture of metals. So there were fibers of the metal, obviously, on the bumper of the car where they hit the object. So then they did more testing on the fibers of the metal, or the fibers pieces out on the car itself. And then this is the results. 92% magnesium, 5% aluminum, 2% zinc, and 1% manganese. I don't know what that means. The interesting thing about this is that, yes, they're made out of things found here on Earth, but I don't know any car brand that puts a ton of magnesium in their cars. So that's like the big thing. What's significant about this is that I found a scientific paper from the Digital Library of Pennsylvania State University that describes not just this account, but a ton of different UFO studies and cases. And that's kind of where I got some of the information about this case from. Basically, it describes the event of the two men hitting the car. They did talk about the composition of the metal found and the kind of story behind it, and it then goes on to say that neither one of the men had any like health issues or any more strange experiences after that, after this whole like main event. And to me, and maybe this is, you know, bad research, I don't know, but when I see a university or some kind of .org situation having a paper that talks about it alongside other UFO studies, it kind of leads credence to the validity of this account, because you have to, I mean, I don't necessarily think the university of anywhere is just going to publish anything. And the fact that there's written documents and evidence of the composition of these things found kind of makes me feel like maybe this event really did happen, and maybe the men in black really did show up to try to receive this, you know, these pieces of debris. Why? I don't really know, because if it's just like chunks and it's just kind of like, you know, pieces of whatever, I don't really know why they would be so, you know, anal to get it back. But I'm not a skin-wearing alien, so I have no idea. Case number 4 is Dr. Herbert Hopkins from 1976. Our boy Herbert was a 58-year-old physician and hypnotist, and he was serving as a consultant on a different UFO event where in Maine a bunch of dudes supposedly got teleported somewhere else. That's a whole episode in and of itself. So if you want an episode on anything that I mentioned, just leave it in the comments. On the evening where he was home alone, where his wife and child were out, he received a phone call by someone who claimed to be the vice president of the New Jersey UFO Research Organization, and asked if he could visit Dr. Hopkins, Mr. Herbert, that night to discuss the case that he was involved in. And what he was doing in the case in Maine was that he was trying to hypnotize and kind of assess the memories of these men that were supposedly abducted or teleported, because they couldn't remember the events during the time they were abducted. He was trying to help them remember, and so he was like, sure, you know, pull up to the function, you know, seemed like the most normal thing to do. And then after the phone call, he went to his front porch, and to turn the light on so that he could kind of help notify this vice president person where he was. And the man was already walking up the steps to his front door, like moments after his phone call had ended. So it's as if he was already there waiting for Herbert to let him in. Herbert is quoted on saying, "I didn't see any car, and even if he had driven, there was no way he could have reached my house that quickly from any phone." Sorry if the lighting looks off now. Something's going on with my light. I'll try to fix it for the next video. Anyway, what I assume he means by like the phone thing is that like maybe like a pay phone or something. So he then let the dude in the house, and he noticed that he was wearing an all black suit, white undershirt, super pristine clothing, and had very, very pale white skin. And when the man sat down and took off his hat, Herbert noticed that he didn't have any hair. He was completely bare. Like again, almost like a mannequin. And another noticeable trait was that he had extremely bright red lips. And when the man wiped his face, it smeared what Herbert thinks was lipstick, and it realized that he didn't have any lips either. And that it's almost as if he used lipstick to kind of emulate what a human's face would look like. During this conversation, it was just kind of UFO talk, aliens, all that kind of normal civic behavior. And the man then strangely talked about how Herbert had 2 coins in his pocket and asked him to pull one of them out, which Herbert did have the 2 coins and pulled one of them out and held his hand out like this with the coin in his hand. Then Herbert claims that the coin blurred and slowly faded from sight, disappeared. And then the man said, and quote,
"Neither you nor anyone else on this planet will ever see that coin again."
Shortly after that, the conversation turned back to UFOs, which then he noticed that the visitor, the Men in Black's speech became very slow and stagnated. And he kept kind of struggling to stay upright, and then when he got up to leave, he was struggling to walk. And in a slurred voice, the Men in Black said, quote,
"My energy is running low. Must go now. Goodbye."
When he left, there was a big white colored-ish thing of light, and Herbert said that it maybe could have been a car, but it was the brightest light he'd ever seen, and there's no way that a headlight could have been that bright, and then the man was gone. So again, with the doctors and like the reputable people, I do think that hypnotism, I mean, think what you want about hypnotism, I think there is some truth to it, but just a weird. The final story that we're going to cover today involves Dan Aykroyd, which, if you don't know who that is, he's an actor. He played in, most notably, the Ghostbusters movie. He's this guy. He has spoken out about this experience quite a bit, and moving forward, like from that experience, he's always kept the same details, and he's been very consistent, which leads a lot of people to believe that this is a true event that happened. He's always been into UFOs and the paranormal. His family was very much into like supernatural type stuff, and he was a very big proponent about how important it was to research UFOs and alien phenomenons and things like that. So he was very much interested in the realm of extraterrestrial life. So much so that he went on to start a show that never aired. In 2002, he was working on a show on the Sci-Fi Channel titled Out There, which focused on UFOs and alien encounters and things like that. One day during filming, he stepped out to take a phone call from Britney Spears, who wanted him to be on Saturday Night Live, and this is when he experienced the Men in Black. He noticed from across the street there was a vehicle emerged, and out of the vehicle emerged 2 men dressed in black suits wearing black hats. And he noticed that one of the men was staring directly at him in what he says is in an almost threatening manner, so eyeing him down pretty much. He then turned away and then looked back, and the car and the people, the 2 men, had totally vanished, as if they were never there. There was no sound, no trace, nothing. And sure, maybe they could have driven off. And there's a whole interview, by the way, that he talks in great detail. I'm not going to put it in here, but I can try to link it in the description. But if not, check it out. And he goes into super great detail about his account. And it is just kind of eerie hearing it from his voice. And like I was saying, they could have driven away. They could have, I guess driven away. But you would have noticed, I'm assuming in a moment, a car would have made some kind of sound, some kind of skirting off, at least hearing it drive away. People getting in and out of the car with the doors. I I don't know. Shortly after this, he finished the phone call, returned into the studio, and the producer said that the show was being canceled and they weren't going to air any of the episodes, and that none of the material ever aired. And just like that, it was done. And like I said, he still keeps this information consistent over all these years. And I say it's the most notable in my opinion because he is and was like such a prominent figure in it. And I understand that like studios shut stuff down all the time, but if they invested all this time and money into some show that was hosted by somebody who was, important and big at the time, I don't know why they would be so quick to shut it down without some kind of warning. So could have been something sus. So the Men in Black, what could they be? So I have no idea. There's so many different theories that they could be, CIA agents or government officials from like the Majestic 12, which that deserves a whole episode in and of itself. And there's theories that they're tulpas, just like thought forms, which I don't necessarily believe because I feel like they happened before it became like a mainstream type situation, something that you could look into. Some people think that they're aliens wearing people. Some people think they're robots. Some people say they're interdimensional beings. And like, personally, I would say that they're either some kind of like government agent or even then I don't know because of how fast they know about things, unless there is some kind of system or some kind of crazy information network that I don't know about, which is totally possible. But I want to say that they're aliens, that they are like kind of like a force within some kind of alien network that's like, we have to keep the general public from knowing about us, and we will, go down dressed up like their authorities to kind of scare them into not doing anything. And I feel like that kind of leads to why they don't actually hurt anybody. They just intimidate people, because then if they start hurting people, it's going to draw way more attention. And it's just fringe enough to where people aren't really going to believe it. Another thing too that I thought was kind of interesting is that it's really hard to get information about the Men in Black other than the movies. You have to kind of dig for it. And this is going to derail a little bit, but it kind of reminds me of like the theories that there's something crazy going on, and then they make a movie or make a show that's really popular, so that when you Google or search for this specific thing, kind of like what, nothing comes up except for that movie or show, kind of like what they did with like people say with Frozen, where like Walt Disney being Frozen became like such a popular thing that they made the Frozen movie, so that when you look up Walt Disney Frozen or Disney Frozen, it brings up the movie and not the information about him and theories and stuff like that. So, it kind of ties into that a little bit, I think, which I think is kind of a fun conspiracy theory. And then also it kind of also ties into, you could make the stretch that maybe like with like the Y2K internet theories and stuff. I don't know too much about those, but like it's kind of because the internet became like commercially available in people's houses during like the mid to late 90s, early 2000s kind of in a way. And that's when like the movie came out, the original Men in Black. And my thought process is maybe once there's all these stories of the Men in Black happening, and then people started to post about it online, start talking about it, and then all of a sudden, the government is like, we can't have this. Make this movie, reset the search engines kind of thing. There we go. As for if I think they're real, there could be something to say about like a government facility or like aliens trying to silence people, or a government group rather, about UFOs and stuff, but I don't 100% believe that. I don't know. I don't think, I don't know, because it's kind of hard to find newer stories and information about those, because it seems like a lot of them happened from like the early 2000s and before. And I don't know, I feel like there are probably, I feel like the UFO community is already not taken very seriously. I mean, I know there's like government hearings and stuff now, but I feel like the Men in Black idea is kind of seen as such like a fringe thing that it's not really taken seriously anyway. So if people are going to talk about it, then people aren't really going to look at them with much respect, I guess you could say, like claiming that they've had these experiences. So I want to say that maybe, honestly, I don't know. And that's okay. I think I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's totally irrational to think that there is some kind of weird government thing going on, but I also don't think it's too far out to say that it's just a bunch of, I don't know, but then with like, I don't know. But with that being said, if anything that I mentioned in here sounds like you want more in depth, like the Majestic 12, or like the other UFO encounters that I had mentioned, let me know in the comments if you want to see those. And I really appreciate it if you guys could subscribe and like and all that good stuff. And I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one.